Well, joining us now live from Tel Aviv, Israel, is Blake Sifton, who is covering this story for CNA. Well, Blake, what's the significance of Trump's visit at this stage of the ceasefire?
President Trump's presence here in Israel on the day the hostages are being released, it's an important step. Of course, we've seen one group of hostages now released. 7 have made their way into Israel, and we expect the remaining 13 to be released in the coming hours. Now, President Trump, of course, has been essential and vital in pushing forward this deal, really willing it into existence. And his visit to Israel is something of a victory tour. Now that he's been greeted at the airport, he will go to Jerusalem, where he will hold a meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He will then meet with the family members of some of the hostages, and he will then address the Knesset. And he will be only the 4th American president ever to address Israel's parliament, and the first in 17 years since President George W. Bush addressed it in 2008. He is wildly popular in Israel at the moment. The family members of the hostages are very thankful. And we expect to see a very large and long-standing ovation for him when he addresses the Knesset. However, certain people watching that address will not be as happy to see him, including far-right members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's ruling coalition. They have serious reservations, to say the least, about much of this deal, from the release of Palestinian prisoners to mentions in the overall deal about pathways to a Palestinian state, or the idea that the Palestinian Authority could take over governance of Gaza eventually. As well, they have advocated and said that after the hostages are released, if Hamas is not dismantled, that Israel should go back to war. And of course, President Trump has guaranteed that that won't happen.
Well, Blake, confirmation of the first 7 Israeli hostages being handed over to the Red Cross. What more do we know about them, and what about the rest of the timeline of the hostage prisoner swap?
So all of the living hostages who are being released today are young men. They include soldiers as well as civilians. Of the 7 that have been released so far, some were taken from their communities along the Gaza border. Others were taken from the Nova Music Festival on October 7th, and others were soldiers stationed along the border who were captured in fighting. Now, we understand, are now in Israel. They're being taken to a military base near the border. They will reunite with their families. They will undergo initial medical and psychological checks, and they will then be taken to one of 3 medical centers in Tel Aviv that's prepared to take them for what's likely to be comprehensive medical treatment. We understand that really any moment now, but in the next hour or 2, we expect the remaining 13 hostages to be released by Hamas to the Red Cross in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. They too will be handed over to Israeli forces and taken to that same base and eventually those same medical centers. Now, when it comes to the deceased hostages, some 28 deceased Israeli hostages, some of them will be handed over by Hamas later today, but we understand that not all of them are expected to be retrieved today. We understand that U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has told hostage families that some of these bodies may be hard to find, and that an international organization will be tasked with trying to retrieve them. But once all of the hostages Israel is expecting to receive today are released, then Israel will release the Palestinian prisoners in return. They include the 1,700 people who were taken and detained from Gaza throughout this war. They include children as well as some medical professionals from hospitals. And then, of course, we will have the 250 so-called security prisoners. These are the high security prisoners that were serving life sentences in Israeli jails. Now, Hamas had been pushing for the inclusion of some high-profile prisoners among that list, but we understand that they are not being included, and these prisoners will be released into the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, and sent into exile abroad.
Now, Blake, we know that Mr. Trump will be heading to Egypt for the peace summit. 20 world leaders will be there, but Hamas and Israel will not be present. Tell us more about this, and how effective will that peace summit be?
This summit really is an effort to maintain and continue along the momentum that's led us to this point. Of course, getting to this stage of this initial phase of the deal has required the joint efforts and pressure by the United States and President Trump, of course, but also mediators like Egypt and Qatar, also Turkey, a major backer of Hamas, and of course, other leaders from the Arab world as well as Europe. Now, the next stage of this deal will be much more challenging to reach than this initial stage was. One major issue that needs to be worked out and decided is the withdrawal of Israeli forces. They still currently control some 53% of territory in Gaza, and their withdrawal from the rest of Gaza, it's tied to the progress of this international stabilization force that's meant to enter Gaza and assist with demilitarization there. The terms so far are vague, and when it comes to the actual force, we still don't know which countries are participating, when it will be assembled, and when it will be ready to deploy. So at a summit like this, we will be looking to see if commitments are made, if announcements are made regarding that force.
Now, there's a lot of uncertainty as the next phases of the Israeli-Hamas deal still need to be negotiated. How is the ceasefire holding amid these developments?
The current ceasefire is holding well. It's expected to hold, and the events today are expected to go according to plan. I think we need to remember that what we have so far is a ceasefire, but the wider peace plan is much more ambitious and will be much harder to realize. And we've essentially had the current situation twice before, where you have a cessation of hostilities, you have the release of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, and you have more aid entering Gaza. Both of those ceasefires broke down. However, unlike those, now we have a much wider plan to be implemented, and both sides have agreed in principle. Now, as I mentioned, far-right partners of Prime Minister Netanyahu do want the war to resume once the hostages are released, and President Trump has provided guarantees that won't happen, which were essential in getting Hamas to agree to release the hostages, because, of course, once they will have lost all their leverage. So we will see if the rest of this moves forward as planned. Now, yesterday we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he released an interesting statement. He said the campaign is not over. Some of our enemies are trying to regroup and attack us again. Now, by that, he may be referring to other groups in other theaters, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, or perhaps even Iran. But talk like that will, of course, make people in Gaza quite nervous and will as well make the United States nervous that perhaps Prime Minister Netanyahu does have wider designs than what's been agreed. There are serious obstacles to overcome, of course. The demilitarization of Gaza, the disarmament of Hamas are major obstacles to overcome. Hamas has shown no willingness so far to disarm. And this transitional government of Palestinian technocrats that's meant to take over Gaza from Hamas, we still do not know who will participate in that government and how they will be chosen.
Now, Blake, what about aid agencies? How are they preparing to provide support for Gaza?
So under the terms of this deal, some 600 trucks of aid are supposed to enter Gaza every day. That's the amount that international aid organizations have said are needed to sustain the population in Gaza. Throughout the war, much less than that has been entering Gaza per day. Now, that level was supposed to begin flowing into Gaza from the moment the ceasefire took hold, which was on Friday. It hasn't been. We understand that more aid began reaching yesterday. The United Nations has said that they are standing by with some 6,000 trucks worth of food, medical aid, as well as shelter materials. They're ready to flood it into Gaza. They've said that more crossings need to be opened, and those crossings need to be operated effectively and efficiently. There is some hope on the horizon. We understand that the Rafah crossing, according to the Italian defense minister, he says that the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza is expected to fully open tomorrow, Tuesday. It's been closed for quite a long time, and when it opens, that will hopefully provide a serious conduit for aid into Gaza. Now, the United Nations have also said that some 500,000 people in Gaza need urgent medical treatment, suffering the effects of famine, and they've also said that they are standing by and ready to rehabilitate critical infrastructure in Gaza, like bakeries, water lines, and sewage treatment facilities.
Well, many thanks for that update, Blake. Blake Sifton covering this story for CNA from Tel Aviv.